Well, as again, thanks again for making the time to be on this call. Keynote, we have Green Team members from 13 of our certification schools that are on this call, and they are involved in a 3-year certification program that focuses on 15 different areas, one of which we're glad to hear you talk to us about, which is water, how we can conserve water and how we can attend to water quality on our campuses. Each of these schools in the certification standards is being asked to decrease their water use by 10%. And so they're looking at benchmarking and the ways that they can reduce their water use and measure that. So we know that your work at Emory has allowed you to gain some valuable experience in that. Ciannat Howett is the Director of Sustainability at Emory University, and of course Candler School of Theology is not in the certification program, but they are one of our over 50 partner schools in the Green Seminary Initiative. Ciannat previously served as Director of the Southern Environmental Law Center, as well as Senior Attorney for the Environmental Protection Agency. She's received numerous awards, including a couple that I'll mention to you. One is the 2002 United States EPA Gold Medal Award for Exceptional Service, as well as the 2004 Environmental Hero Award from the Wilderness Society. So we're thrilled that she could make the time to be with us today, and I'll hand it off to her so we can have this important conversation about water. Always use the chat box if you have any questions that come to mind, and we'll make sure that we lift those up. Ciannat, welcome.
Thank you. Well, I really am delighted to be with you this afternoon, and I applaud your involvement in the Green Seminaries initiative. And I think in particular around this issue of water, it's so important for our seminaries to engage and make it part of your ministry and your mission. And what I thought I'd do is run through our journey at Emory, talk about some of the operational ways that you can achieve your 10% reduction goal, and then also talk about the very important role you can play in the culture change that we need to see happen. And I think actually when I think about it, as important as it is that you're going to be reducing your water footprint by 10%, the most important thing that you can all be doing is helping with the education and outreach that is necessary for us to really change the way we think about water. So, you know, when I think about my child who's now 10 years old, and when he becomes an adult, I am convinced that he and his children will look at the way we treated water and be absolutely appalled. When you think about the fact that every day, day after day, we flush clean, safe drinking water down the toilet, water that has had to have incredible energy inputs, chemical inputs, the carbon footprint of that water is extremely high. And yet at the same time in other parts of the world, young women in particular are risking life and limb to fetch water. The UN estimate I saw is over 1 million young women are not being educated because they have the role of fetching water. And the same water we're using without a second thought. So one of the important things you can do is start to emphasize the role of water as sacred. And of course, you know better than I that water through all cultures throughout time has always been used in sacred rituals for every major religion. And when we think about the fact that 75% of our bodies are water, water is essential to human life. The United Nations has declared it a human right. That gets lost in today's modern society. I think we can all agree on that. But that's got to change. The UN's latest projections are that global water demand will outstrip supply by 40% by 2030, which is really right around the corner. The US EPA has projected that 40 of our 50 states will face water shortages by 2024. So we're really talking about a new kind of cultural situation where we need to be always actively conserving. And, you know, in some parts of our country, that's easy to imagine. In the arid Southwest, for example, it's sort of part of the culture that people know they need to xeriscape their lawns, let's say. But in Atlanta, where we get on average 50 inches of rainfall a year, it has been much more challenging to try to convey to our students, faculty, staff, and administrators the critical importance of conserving water. It's raining frequently down here, and yet we can't really make good use of that rainwater under our current systems. We take 98% of our drinking water from just one water basin. So Atlanta is the largest municipality reliant on the smallest single watershed for its water. And with our population growth and projections, it's not going to sustain us. It's that the math doesn't work on us having enough water moving into the future. So looking at that, Emory decided we needed to come out really strongly on water stewardship and conservation. And some of the things that we did, you can also do at your seminaries. Our goal was 50% reduction, which we've hit. And so some of this can help with that 10% reduction you're seeking. So some of the simple things that we've done is to greatly reduce turf. And I'm a big advocate of this because it really hits the sweet spot of sustainability in that it's better socially, environmentally, and economically. There are a lot of labor and cost savings with reducing the amount of mowing that needs to go on and fertilizing and all the upkeep that's involved in turf care. Turf also contributes to noise pollution and air pollution through its maintenance. So we have started by just slowly moving the edges of the lawns and landscapes to more natural shrubbery and trees. The benefit of that in terms of water is it needs a lot less irrigation. You're going to need irrigation in the first 6 to 9 months to establish the plants. But after that, if you've chosen the correct plants, you can pretty much turn it off and they will do fine. So what you're looking for there are native plants, plants that don't require a lot of water. And most native plants don't. They're meant for your landscape. So we prohibit anything but natives at Emory. So there's a lot that can be done with that. One of the very important steps we took was to create a water footprint. And, you know, everybody talks about carbon footprints. I'm quite sure all of your institutions have probably calculated their carbon footprint. Really important to do, but equally important is to calculate your water footprint. And there are good resources for that online. You can look at the US EPA. They have a water sense guide. You can look to the American Water Works Association and the US Water Alliance. Those are good resources for you. But when we did that in Emory, what we found was that even though everybody thought irrigation was probably the main way that we were wasting water and using water, irrigation, though important, you know, to reduce, was by far the smallest sector of our water footprint. Most of what we were using water for was either potable water, drinking water for food preparation and showers, that sort of thing. And then an equally large slice was for heating and cooling our buildings, because our Candler School of Theology and all of our university is on a very big campus boiler and chiller system. My guess is that's true for a lot of your institutions too. And we do not need clean, safe drinking water used in those facilities. So basically what you want to do is look at your water use and say, what has to be drinking water? And it's going to be really just what you drink and what you're showering and food preparation. And then say everything else, I'm going to try to minimize and replace where I can with non-potable water. I'm going to try to reclaim that water. So we started to do that with cisterns. Most of them were underground, though you can also have a cistern above ground. And what's wonderful about the cisterns is that it captures the big gully washer rainstorms that we have in the South that tend to pollute our creeks and streams with sediment as they move over the landscape. Instead, it would capture those that water, and then we could use that water during our periods when we weren't getting rain, which are equally frequent, to water our landscapes, to use on our educational gardens and things like that. We also then started to use that rainwater for toilet flushing. And we had to go through quite a process because it was illegal in the state of Georgia to use anything but clean, safe drinking water to flush toilets when we started this journey. But that's where I say that the cultural part is just as important and in some ways harder than the technology involved in water conservation. And there's actually kind of a funny story because in the end, our local county health department said, well, okay, you can use the rainwater for toilet flushing, but you have to dye it blue so that nobody drinks the water, which kind of made us laugh because you have to be pretty smart to get into Emory, and we didn't worry that our students were going to drink the toilet water, but the county was worried. So we had to dye it blue. It's not a chemical. It just is to signal to everyone that the toilet water is not to be drunk and that it is reclaimed water. So we were saving hundreds of thousands of gallons a year just by capturing the rainwater and using it for toilet flushing. And then we said, well, we want to go big. We want to cut our water use in half. So we found a technology in Europe that we really liked where we take raw sewage and through natural ecological systems, we treat it on site and we use that exclusively to heat and cool our buildings and for toilet flushing. Now, I realize not everyone can do that. I encourage you, if you have a larger institution, to look at our website. It's sustainability.emory.edu. If you go under water, you'll see reference to what's called the Water Hub, and it's that ecological system. It's the first of its kind in the United States, but we've heard already that several other institutions are looking at it to do on their campuses as well. But that's where you go from saving about 10 to 20% to saving something more like 50%. But I think if what you have authority over and what you can do something about is a smaller scope, please don't be discouraged. There's so much that can be done to save water. I mentioned already doing a lot on just reducing turf. Another big savings that you can find is just on an outreach program around leaks. I mean, it sounds so silly and simple, but if you just have next to your toilets and faucets, you know, call this number for leak repair. So much of our water is lost that way. Look at replacing older equipment, toilets and dishwashers and any laundry facilities. A lot of municipalities now have rebate programs where if you have an old toilet, they will actually give you, like in my county, $25 they'll give you for a new high efficiency toilet to replace a toilet that was in place before 1975. So, you know, they seem like simple things, but they're meaningful. They're little aerators you can put on faucet heads that reduce the amount of water you're using. So the theme here operationally is saving where you can by using less water, and then any non-potable water replacing it. Any uses that can allow non-potable water like irrigation, replacing that with collected water in rain barrels or cisterns or something like that if you can. You'll hit your 10%, no doubt, I think, if you do those simple things. Then on the issue of outreach and education, I mean, one of my favorite sort of awareness building exercises I do in my class every year, I teach in the Rollins School of Public Health. And I've done this for many years, where we have our students simply take a bucket of water. They have to calculate how much water they need to use for their cooking and bathing and drinking. And they're always amazed by how much they need to use in a day. And then we task them with going out on campus and collecting their water. And it's such an important exercise because they are amazed at how heavy the water is, how much of it they have to haul, how long it takes to haul. And then we'd have them do water quality testing to see how excited they are about drinking that water. Because of course there are tons of microorganisms. You would never want to have that as your drinking water. But it helps a lot of our students who come from suburban backgrounds maybe relate better to people in other parts of the world where that's their reality of what getting water is like every single day. So one of the things that I really want to encourage you to do is help your seminary and those that you're ministering to understand this as an exercise in mindfulness. Because what we're all doing together is flushing our toilets without thinking about it in the least, without thinking about the value of water. And we aren't right now pricing water in our municipalities in a way that makes us pay a lot of attention to it. Water is ridiculously cheap given its value. And so we are not sort of doing that very daily sort of meditation around water that we could do if we were to begin to do these simple conservation measures. So we'll just have little pictures in the stall of people in other parts of the world with an urn, balanced on their head, or we'll have a little fact like the UN fact that I shared with you about the water scarcity that's ahead. And just anything that you can do to help raise that consciousness. I really encourage that as much as the sort of operational changes that I've talked to you about. So I'm going to pause there and just see if people have questions or comments and reflections on that.
Ciannat, I'm wondering if you have any tips or thoughts that would be helpful in regards to benchmarking.
Yeah. So we do a lot of that in higher education. There's an Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education that requires that all of our universities submit data related to water and energy and other sort of metrics. I'm not aware of anything like that that's done nationally for just seminaries, but I think your organization might be the perfect one to do it because that data is available. And in fact, now US EPA, I just came from a presentation on Energy Star Portfolio Manager, which is the national data bank for metrics on water and energy. And many, many, many of your institutions, I'm sure, are submitting that data into Energy Star Portfolio Manager. It's just a matter of accessing it. So that could be a really interesting project, is to gather that data and do some national benchmarking to say, okay, where are we now in 2018, and where do we, want to be? So yeah, the data is there. It's just, I'm not aware of anyone who's undertaking that exercise specific to seminaries right now, but definitely they are for higher ed.
Mm-hmm. Any questions or comments?
Ciannat, Richard Boyce at Union Presbyterian Seminary at Charlotte. We occupy a very small triangular piece of land at the sort of foot of Sharon Presbyterian Church. And when we built this building, we were required to build a very expensive catchment basin underneath our building because we're sort of the catch point for the whole property. So we've got over $1 million in concrete right beneath us that flows out eventually into the stormwater system. I'm intrigued by this idea of underground cisterns. I mean, this is fairly toxic runoff coming down our way, but and I'm curious. I'm just thinking of an underground lake beneath us that's sitting fairly stagnant and non-flowing. But Dennis, I cue you. You're the one that got us into this to some degree, and it just seems to me there's a fairly significant piece of our particular property we might ought to research.
And I offline provide you with some names of consultants you might want to talk to who worked with us on, yes, you're right, you couldn't take that water and just without any treatment put it to use, but with some modest treatment, you know, again, you're not needing to raise it to the level of drinking water quality. It just has to be safe for human exposure. You could then make use of that water. I don't know how your heating and cooling is done, but that's a potential for sure for irrigation. So, you know, there might be some kind of neat creative things, and depending on how much you're paying in water rates, that kind of system might pay for itself over time, particularly because you're not going anywhere. I mean, I think that's one of the great things about the institutions that we're part of is we can make that investment for the long term because we know that we're going to still be around and we'll see the benefit of that. So yeah, I would explore that if I were you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Abby, any other questions from anyone?
John Everett said, do you know which system material is better, plastic or galvanized? Doesn't matter. So that's the first question. And then the second question is, Carla, to perhaps everyone, does anyone have experience with reclaiming gray water?
So the question about plastic or galvanized, so I think it depends on the application. For our system that takes the sewage and reclaims it to make it safe enough to be used for heating and cooling systems and for toilet flushing, we have to use plastic piping just because of the microbial content of the pipes and the potential for glomming up of the pipes. The preferred is the PVC plastic pipe. However, there's a big movement nationally to get away from that because you all know that PVC is associated with the release of dioxin. So for living buildings and some of these more aggressive certification programs, those are on the red list. You're not allowed to use PVC plastic piping. So there's this quandary in the world of sustainability nationally between the desire to use reclaimed water and the reality that it poses challenges to use plastic piping when you're also trying to achieve these other certification levels for environmental stewardship, like in the production of the pipe and so on. PVC is definitely less desirable. So it's a little bit of a national discussion right now, to be totally honest with you. I would say it kind of depends on the application. But we're using reclaimed water at Emory, and if anyone's interested in a deeper dive on that, I would be delighted to talk to them. You can reach me through sustainability.emory.edu or directly, ciannat.howett@emory.edu, because we did a lot of research before jumping into this, and I would love to be able to share that.
Ciannat, this is Mary Elizabeth Moore, and it's good to see
Hi!
you.
Oh my goodness!
It's great to see you.
What a treat to see you, Mary
We
Elizabeth.
overlapped for almost 2 years at Emory, and I love the work you're doing. I can't believe how far you've come with all of this work.
Thank you. Oh, what a treat. I think of you often and miss you.
And I of you.
Thank
I have a question because we've received a recent contact from a group in Boston that's doing work on watershed protection and nurture. And do you have examples at Emory of ways you've partnered with others in the community in this water work?
Yes, so I'm glad you asked. We were participants in the Eco Districts project. So one of the difficult issues we have in the metro Atlanta area is that we have an aging sewer system like Boston, a lot of our old cities. And so we have sewer overflows that happen disproportionately in minority and low income neighborhoods. And so the US EPA had issued a consent decree against the city of Atlanta and our county. And, you know, they're having to replace the sewer system. But meanwhile, these communities are really suffering. So one of the big incentives for Emory in doing our water hub and some of the other on-site treatment that we're doing is because our water system just could not handle how much sewage was coming to them. So by treating it on site, we remove 146 million gallons a year. That means that's reducing the likelihood of sewer overflows in those communities. So we did a lot of partnering and community outreach sort of to make sure that this was a good idea and to understand how the system worked. And what we discovered was that in those communities too, there were people eager to understand tips for water savings, because of course that translates into benefits in their pocketbook, you know, because water rates are high. But it also is a wonderful way for Emory to feel as though it was a smart investment for us, because it did require some risk and investment, but we saw that there was a huge social justice benefit by being good stewards and taking that sewage and treating it ourselves rather than pumping it downstream and letting it be somebody else's problem. So we did that. In terms of green space and habitat, the other really interesting thing we're doing that's related to water is we are trying to plant at least 25-foot buffers along all the major creeks and streams. We also are making that pollinator habitat, and we've been doing that in partnership with Chattahoochee River Keeper and some other local nonprofit groups that are interested in really low-cost, easy ways that we can improve our water quality by allowing natural filtration to take place. And the simplest thing to do is just to, again, don't let the turf go right up to your waterway, planting natural trees and shrubs, and in particular pollinator species. You get a lot of different co-benefits that come from that. But I'd love to talk to you more if you'd be interested.
And I think we'll be in touch, but thank you very much for that.
Thanks.
Ciannat has been generous and gracious enough to allow us to stay in communication with her. And Ciannat, this has been valuable. We could talk the rest of the afternoon on this important topic, and I think we will want to stay in touch with you on this topic and other sustainability topics that we need to focus on at our seminaries and theological schools. Abby has put up Ciannat's email address, so you need to be careful what you say, Ciannat. When you say, let me know if you need, if I, your inbox will be full.
Please feel free to contact me. Pleasure. Yeah.
Great.
All right. Well, thank you all so much.
Any other questions? Well, thank you. Are there any other questions for Ciannat before she signs off and leaves us? Did you have any others in the chat box, Abby, that we needed to lift up? Okay.
No.
Well, Ciannat, stay on if you can, but we want to be respectful and mindful of your time. Again, thanks so much for being with us this afternoon.
Thanks. It was my pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye, Ciannat.
You bet.
So then the next part of our call together will be Union presenting about where they are in the process. If you've been tracking the order of things, Union is in our third cohort. And so they're going to talk about where they are. And Dean Richard Boyce, I'm going to let you introduce the people from your team who are on this call. And then we're looking forward to hearing you talk for about 15 minutes, and then we'll have space for a larger discussion.
Thank you very much, Abby, and thanks to everybody who's tuned in. There are really three, I guess I can claim four participants here. The ones that are charged to speak are me to lead off, to talk a little bit about our energy audit and things we're doing in terms of our operations. First off, then Paul Galbraith, who's up in Asheville, and on our faculty, is going to talk a little bit about curriculum with regard to one of his classes and how that's influencing his other classes here. And then Rodney Sadler has just appeared. He's been on, but now I can see him, who's out of his home office, who has some larger dreams moving forward. Rodney always has large dreams, so I don't know what he's going to come up with. But also here is Dennis Testerman, who is the person who encouraged us to get on board with GSI and is right here in our backyard. And thank you, Dennis, for your comments about a rain garden and possible native species. We do have a small piece of property, but in some ways that might make it easier for us to make a witness than like our home campus up in Richmond that covers multiple acres. So I'm going to lead off, and followed by Paul, and then Rodney, and maybe Dennis at the end of that. If you have anything to add, that would be more than welcome. We're still at the, at least I consider us at the beginning stages of this process, and I'm, as the dean, still sort of digesting Colby May's audit of this building and its operations and suggestions for what we might do to make a better green witness. Ciannat talked about mindfulness, and already simply being in this program, I'm thinking I've become a professor of preaching, and now when I go out preaching, daggone it, I get introduced as a professor of preaching, and congregations expect something. Well, when people hear that we're in the Green Seminary initiative, I think that raises a level of expectations, and people are on guard a little bit more as they come into this building and participate in our programs to see whether or not our title is really backed up by our practices. They're just some funny stories. The most recent one with Rodney, you had one of your groups in, I think it was the solar energy group, and we ran out of paper products. So somebody came out looking for some coffee, and one of our volunteers offered her a cup of coffee in a styrofoam cup, which of course that her off. And she says, well, maybe you're not a coffee drinker. How about some bottled water? And she almost ran out of the building. So we're still sort of practicing getting on board with this, and really trying to get the low-hanging fruit first. We are looking at our paper products, our meal operations, and trying to decrease our waste products here. That's one of the first things we've been tackling. We're going to refit most of our light fixtures. We've been getting quotes on our fluorescent light fixtures and are beginning to, we're going to sort of do them a room at a time with some more high efficiency bulbs throughout our building. The big, in some ways, the toughest conversation we've been in the middle of, almost from the word go, were our set points for our heating and cooling here in this building. And it's sort of funny, Colby gave me this material, and I read it way too quickly and flipped around to the back where there was an energy policy from California State University. So I jumped in and tried to implement this sort of from the word go, which allows thermostats no lower than 78 degrees for cooling. And that didn't go over very well here, and began to get howls of protest. And so it I think the point is just engaging in this conversation has made us all a little more mindful. Well, if you can't go 78, let's try 76 or 75 or 74. Where can we start and then grow into this with the knowledge that perhaps when we start getting a little uncomfortable, we'll realize we're making a witness and doing something for the environment. So I'm simply testifying, first off, as the dean, that going through the energy audit process and beginning to think about and filling out the certification forms has raised my awareness of our operations. We're blessed with a fairly high efficiency building because it's brand new, and most of our equipment is brand new and high efficiency. But it's more in the small details where I think we can make a tangible witness, putting up signs to cut off light fixtures. We had on our list some of the aerators for our faucets and those sorts of things. I'm intrigued by this notion of our underground cistern as well. I think one of the things that Rodney will be coming back to is the possibility of some solar installations on our roof. We could take some of the leading edge here in the state of North Carolina with regard to religious and theological institutions in terms of solar use. Again, the fact that it would be a fairly small installation might allow us the opportunity to move fairly quickly on that and then see how we can leverage that investment for some of our congregations and institutions that might consider something far more extravagant. I think I simply wanted to lead off with the fact that this process is making me and us think a lot more about our day-to-day operations. Just a couple of large things I would mention that I hope the group can help us some on. We're a part-time non-residential seminary, so the whole idea of student engagement beyond our classroom, our worship, and our mealtime on Saturdays is somewhat difficult. We're not living in community with one another, so our day-to-day practices are not shared, and the ability for us to have a student committee that meets on a regular basis face-to-face is difficult. So we have got to get a student committee up and running. Right now it's almost all faculty, as you see, and so for I'd be interested in any non-residential campuses for how they're getting their students involved during the week when they're not here. The other big issue for us, just theoretically, is our biggest problem in terms of Green Seminary is our carbon footprint, that we're a commuter school and that most of our students drive in on Saturdays and away, some of them as far away as a couple of 100 miles. So obviously carpooling and other things like that might be a way for us to witness, but I'd be curious at some point to engage a conversation for a commuter school regarding the Green Seminary initiative, what that might look like. That's my lead off. I'm going to turn it over to Paul.
Thank you, Richard. I was asked to speak a little bit about the intersection between the classes I teach and issues of creation care. So this really primarily began for me in terms of a course that I designed and started teaching about 5 or 6 years ago that grew out of a sabbatical project I had. And the course is called Ecology and Worship. And the primary goal of that class is to begin to help students to look critically and constructively about the ways that worship language and practices intersect with the call to discipleship that's part of creation care. So we began by kind of noting that our worship books and the language of our worship books are generally pretty much devoid of language of the earth. and that the practices that we're used to don't really line up with the kind of even basic environmental concerns that people in the pews have. I mean, we cut down flowers so that we have dead flowers in the sanctuary is, you know, one way of kind of analyzing that. And then kind of through that process, we kind of roll back to look at how prominent the earth is in Scripture, how that could be a resource for us to begin to kind of piece together ways that the language and practices of worship can actually reflect the values that we say are kind of central to a life of Christian faith. So that's kind of an intensive way in which creation care is focused around a particular elective class that I teach. What I've noticed is that in some ways this work has kind of prompted me to kind of push this into other aspects of the curriculum, so that in Theology 1, when we look at the doctrine of creation, then is an opportunity for us to kind of connect the theological witness of the church to our calls to participate in creation care. When I teach intro to ethics, then again, kind of the intersection in terms of kind of environmental responsibility is a way of kind of living into the virtues of Christian faith, kind of come at the forefront. And in my own work, I'm particularly interested in ways that the sacraments themselves kind of line up with responsible use of kind of water and earth, and of making sure that we can find ways to make kind of natural connections for people in the pews to be able to kind of see how some of the choices that they're already making outside of the church in their own kind of personal daily lives actually can be rooted in kind of basic Christian practices. So it's been, for me, in some ways, it's kind of similar to what Richard was saying. There's kind of a domino effect that as kind of if you start out on this process and pilgrimage, wherever you start, then you can begin to see ways that it kind of ripples through kind of broader circles in terms of curricular interests. So I'll stop at that and let Rodney speak.
Greetings all. I wanted to just talk a little bit about some visions that we have for the way that the seminary can become useful in not just working on our own space, but setting up a different paradigm as we go forward. We've been involved with a number of different groups here in Charlotte that have found a home within the seminary, that have been born within our seminary walls, and that continue to move from the work that we do here. So for example, one group that I hope the seminary will be able to benefit from, Richard hinted at it a little bit earlier, is a group called Faith in Solar. Faith in Solar is a group that is sponsored in part by the work of North Carolina activist group NC Warren, which has for years been a watchdog on Duke Energy. NC Warren said, well, if we can come together with church leaders, we might find a way to move Duke by moral pressure to consider what if we were able to help provide free or no money down solar energy for houses of worship and do this across the state. So we've been working on that. A lot of this work, some of the meetings even have taken place here at the seminary. And the goal is that we'll be able to do with houses of faith and also with our seminary, no money down solar either purchases or leasing that helps us, hopefully, enables us to get around that loophole. Because we're 501c3s, we're not able to take advantage of the 30% tax rebate. But if we do it on a lease basis with an organization that is for profit, they might be able to take advantage of it as we pay off the lease over time. So thinking of creative strategies like that in this regard. Another thing that we've done is we've worked with another group that was actually born here on the campus, a group called the North Carolina Creation Care Network. And the goal of the Creation Care Network was twofold. One, it was to say that we need to bring together people of faith who have been working on areas of creation care, who've been working on climate justice. North Carolina, big issue is environmental justice, who've been working in these different sectors, often in silos. How do we begin to bring them out, bring them to a common table so that we can begin to achieve common goals together? We need that broad-based group to be able to do that. And one of the things that we've thought about is, in addition to trying to unite those people of faith who are working, the church also has the moral voice to be able to stand to the very siloed groups. NC Warren, Sierra Club, League of Conservation Voters, Friends of the Earth, all of these groups that tend to work in their own silos over time. What if we were to say, let's come together and agree on a few points, work towards that larger goal of achieving goals on those 3 points, these 3 or 4 points? Might we begin to make better progress than we have before? Again, something that was born out of what it is that we do as a seminary and the basis of what we have as a faith community. So one of the things that I've been really very much interested in doing is leveraging what we do and helping to utilize the seminary as a place to remind people that the work of climate change, the work of preventing climate change, I should say, the work of trying to redeem the planet, the work of trying to redeem creation, as it were, is work that has very deep spiritual roots. And if we are able to claim those roots, if we're able to unite people around this vision, we might be able to make progress that has been heretofore unattainable. So.
I would invite Dennis, any comment you want to make as our co-partner here?
Just based on some of the previous calls that we've had and early visions that I had, I'm still interested in seeing if ultimately we can come up with some way to involve students in some of the supervised ministry practicums that they're doing. I just had a meeting on Monday night at my home church, Caldwell Presbyterian, with a Union student, Donna Singletary, who's going to be working for this year as an intern, and wishing that there had been a chance to connect some of the dots there and involve her in some of the ongoing stuff that we are doing at Caldwell, and getting our own congregation certified as an Earth Care congregation by the Presbyterian denomination. And the other thing is conversations that I've been having with the pastor at Sharon Presbyterian and some of the other members of that church. And it seems like there is an opportunity to deal with some of the link up, some of the things that are happening with the church, and possibly them seeking certification as an environmental congregation as well somewhere down the line. But brings to mind, and I'm a few years out of seminary. I say that tongue in cheek, but back in the day when I was doing seminary, there was a big, I think there still is, an emphasis on the church being not an ivory tower, but very much engaged in real world stuff. And so a lot of our faculty were out in churches constantly. Some of them actually would take on congregations on an interim basis. So I think there's an opportunity there as students and faculty members work in congregations to kind of help bring the congregations along with the certification of those campuses, and sort of walking the walk as well as talking the talk. And now Union can serve as a model for that.
All right, Abby, I see there have been some comments on commuting. That's very helpful. We'll follow up on that after this, but we've taken up our time. We'll listen to some questions.
Great. I love the model of self-moderating. You must be a good Presbyterian. Yeah, so in the comments, Taliesin from BU has shared a resource on the carpooling that they do there. I'll be sure to send that out in the email that we send out to all of you after this call. And then she's also shared information about the Cool Congregations program from Interfaith Power and Light.
I figured out how to unmute myself, by the way, Abby. Sorry about that.
No, I'm so grateful. Whenever I say I'm going to mute everybody, I always worry that there will be a technical glitch and people will be silenced. So I'm really grateful that we've fixed that problem.
Yeah, that's fine. And by the way, it's Taliesin, just so you know.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I'm named after Taliesin, so it's a totally understandable mistake.
Great. Great. So thank you for all of the team at Union for your presentation. We can spend maybe 2 more minutes if folks have other questions, and then we'll just have a little bit of additional open space time.
Can Taliesin tell me just a little bit more about the Good Carpooling and Commute Better Together program?
Well, so this is not something I participated in. It's just that Boston University not only is in the middle of Boston, so it has a lot of public transportation options. And so it's a very, I think in some ways, a very different situation for you because they have such a big campus. So they also have incentives for people to use a bus that goes from different parts of the campus to other parts of the other, campuses and bicycles. So when you arrive, even if you have to drive in, there are incentives for people to use bikes after that. And there's even bike sharing type things that you can do. And so they've got a whole bunch of different things that they do to try to promote more green transportation choices. But there also are a lot of people who commute in from all over, even as far away as Maine, down to Boston. And so they have these, a couple of different things that they do. And one of them kind of piggybacks onto a Bay State commuter program where you can find ride share options through an existing program, but through the campus itself, through Boston University, then they offer incentives for people. For example, if you need to park nearby or on campus, then you get a discount, like a 50% discount if you participate in this Commute Better Together program, and you get a $50 gasoline card toward gas. And like they just, so you can go to the website. The website is just, I think Abby was going to send it out in the email, but it's just bu.edu/parking/commute better together. And actually, anybody who's interested in looking at Boston University, they have a sustainability, that's like the hub of all of their sustainability stuff. And we at the School of Theology, and Mary Elizabeth, can say more about this too, but we have our own kind of more focused and spiritually focused in sort of initiatives that we do, but it's kind of like in some ways it's really great, in other ways it makes it harder, but we're part of this larger university that's doing all of this other stuff, and sometimes we can jump onto it, right? And so the sustainability at BU isn't through the seminary, it's through the larger university. And if you go there, that's actually where I was reading about the trayless dining, like dining halls that stop using trays save an enormous amount of water and also food waste. And that's like a kind of low-hanging fruit that a lot of campuses are jumping onto. So anyway, if you just go to the sustainability at Boston University, then it'll take you to all of these different areas, and one of them is transportation. And if you go to the transportation area, then it'll take you to these different things that I'm talking about, including the Commute Better Together program. Was that clear?
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
What a rich conversation we have had this afternoon. I'm mindful of our time and grateful at your commitment to being on this call today. Like we said earlier, we are recording this, so we will share this with you and the rest of your Green Team members. We're grateful for Ciannat Howett to be with us today, and grateful also for the good work that is happening at Union Presbyterian Seminary. It's good to hear that good report. Next month, we are going to shift gears and move into the fourth focus area, which is community life. And we're going to focus on food. We've mentioned that just a little bit in regards to our relationship with water. But the food services, according to your certification program standards, is section D.1. And our guests Is it Sarah King that is going to join us next month, Abby?
Yeah, Sarah King, one of the directors of Creature Kind, will be joining with us. Creature Kind is related to the evangelical church, but they particularly look at animal welfare, food, and spirituality. So she'll be talking through some of the certification things that all of you have to work through. And then she'll be talking about some of the practical ways to address food companies. And I'm hoping she'll tell the story of what it was like to sit down with Aramark at Drew. So.
And Abby, it's appropriate for us to invite, for instance, the staff person who's in charge of our food services to join us for one of these, right?
Please do.
That would
Please.
be amazing. We would love for you to do that. Well, great. As Sarah said, we'll send out a recording. I do try to keep track of resources that you all mention to share those out in the email. And I'm looking forward to being with all of you next month. And please let us know if we can support you in the meantime.
Can I just, before we hang up, can I just mention, in case not everybody reads every word of every email, that we're going to talk about food next time, but reducing meat consumption has an enormous impact on water. It's like one of the biggest things people can do. And it's not very popular because everyone loves meat, but I just felt like it was important to just, in case not everybody reads everything, I just wanted to throw that in today on the water conservation phone call.
That's great, and we'll talk more about that next month. But thanks for mentioning that. Okay, thanks everyone. We'll see you next month. Peace.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.